Hi, everyone. I'm Paola Bacchetta, professor and chair in the Department of Gender and Women's Studies at UC Berkeley, and I have the honor and pleasure of moderating this event organized around the new book, Forced by Circumstance, Chicana Feminist Essays 1981 to 1924 by Norma Alarcón and published this year by Antlut Press. So we're delighted to have with us today Norma Alarcón herself, along with two of the book's co-editors, Dionne Espinoza and Marisa Belausteguigoitia.
Belauste, say only Belauste. It's okay.
Belausta.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's very difficult. It's a Basque name, right?
That's like Ansaldúa.
Yes.
Also.
Unfortunately, Norma Cantú can't be here with us because of illness, and I would like to begin with an acknowledgement by Antlut Press and all the speakers that were here on ancestral and present land of different native peoples on the continent, and in every case, the indigenous stewards of these lands, in accordance with their traditions, have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this land. In every case, as guests, we need to recognize benefiting from living and working on these lands and to pay respects by acknowledging the indigenous stewards of the land, including their ancestors, elders, and relatives, by affirming the sovereign rights of each of the first peoples, but also by committing to active solidarity with their movements. So very precisely, Antlut Press is located on the land of the Rametush Ohlone, land that the colonizers renamed San Francisco, California. I'm speaking from the land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people that colonizers renamed Berkeley, California. The Ohlone are organized into a woman-run land-back movement called Sigorate. Allies can get more information about the Ohlone and their movement, including about solidarity actions with the movement, by going to the Sigorate website, which I've put in the chat, but I think it's only for panelists. And if Georgina, if you could put it in the general chat, I would be grateful. Each speaker will begin by situating herself on specific native land from which she is speaking. So if you're in the audience, may I ask you to type in the name of the land that you're on and the name of the indigenous stewards of the land and how people can find out more about the movements if you have that possibility. Now the event, Norma Alarcon's book and this event are particularly meaningful right now. I think we all recognize that because they come at a time of the structural solidification of fascism in the US and the rise of the extreme right wing and fascist governments and social movements across the globe. In the US, we are experiencing, of course, an acceleration in lethal racism, disrespect, hate, violent policies targeting Chicanx and Latinx people and indigenous Black and Asian people, Muslims, and all people of color. And we're faced with murderous attitudes and policies towards gender and sexuality studies and against all people embodying gender and sexualities outside the colonial racialized heterosexist norm. There's currently an acceleration of genocides and war across the globe, and Norma Alarcon's book, Forced by Circumstance, speaks both directly and indirectly to this extremely imposed violence, but also to how violence can get reproduced within feminist and queer social movements, providing analysis and insight that can incite us and help us to understand, combat, and change these current conditions. It's a very timely book, and importantly, we can glean from the book a lot of ideas also about how to survive and thrive in the meantime. Though the book, of course, the essays are written before this particular period, but I think they're very useful for this period. The event's going to be structured into two parts. First, Norma Alarcón will introduce the book Forced by Circumstance, followed by the book's co-editors. And next, the speakers will discuss each of the book's three sections and before we just conclude. So in the meantime, again, you can find the link to the book in the chat, and or you can go directly to the website. So first of all, Norma Alarcón is Professor Emerita in the Departments of Gender and Women's Studies, Ethnic Studies, and Spanish and Portuguese at the University of California, Berkeley. She is the founder and publisher of Third Woman Press, which gave voice to many Chicana and Latina feminist writers, publishing books that are now classics. Third Woman Press trained generations of graduate students who helped as interns with the press, and Professor Alarcón is also the author of a book in Spanish about Rosario Castellanos entitled Ninfomanía, el discurso feminista en la obra poética de Rosario Castellanos. She is a co-editor with Karen Kaplan and Minu Mo'alam of the classic in transnational feminist theory titled Between Woman and Nation, Nationalism, Transnational Feminisms, and the State. Many of Professor Alarcón's articles and book chapters are themselves classics in feminist theory. Hardly a book on feminist theory is published without the texts, the theoretical subjects of this bridge called My Back and Anglo-American Feminism, and the very well-known Traductora Traditora, a paradigmatic figure of Chicana feminism. Both these essays, along with a plethora of other essays by Professor Alarcón, are included in this new book. Professor Alarcón's writings challenge dominant epistemologies and theories that claim to represent the experiences of Chicanas and women of color, and they open up new spaces for deeper conversations about racism, colonialism, resistance, and creating other kinds of relations and modes of life. Professor Alarcón's work is published in English and in Spanish, but also in French. Notably, Professor Alarcón co-edited with Jules Faquet and me a special issue of the Paris-based French-language feminist journal Les Cahiers du Cédref on decolonial feminist and queer theory with a focus on Chicana feminist and queer theory. Additionally, the essay, The Theoretical Subjects of This Bridge, is included in that special issue, and it appears again in the newly published first French translation of the classic co-edited book by Shiri Moraga, who is with us today, and Gloria Anzaldúa, This Bridge Called My Back. At home, Professor Alarcón received the National Chicano and Chicana Studies Scholar Award, the Mujeres Activas en Letras y Cambio Social Tortuga Award, recognition for her immense contribution to Chicana and Chicano literature by the Modern Language Association, an award from the MLA's Distinguished Scholar Award, and from the Division on Chicana and Chicano Literature. I want to introduce Norma Cantú, even though she is not with us today, and because she's been essential to bringing this book together and also to bringing us together for this event. So Norma Cantú is Noreen R. and T. Frank Murchison Distinguished Professor of the Humanities at Trinity University. Professor Cantú is an award-winning author and poet and a renowned scholar of the U.S.-Mexico borderland. She publishes poetry, fiction, folklore, and her recent co-edited anthologies include Mexicana, Fashions, Politics, Self-Adornment, and Identity Construction, and the book Somos Tejanas, Chicana Identity and Culture in Texas. I'd like to introduce Dionne Espinoza. Dionne is professor in the Department of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Cal State LA. She is co-editor of two award-winning books, Chicana Movidas, New Narratives of Women's Activism and Feminism in the Movement Era, co-edited with Maria Cotera and Maylie Blackwell, and Enriqueta Vasquez and the Chicano Movement, co-edited with Lorena Oropeza. In her work, she centers Chicana feminist voices, archives, and theories. Marisa Belausteguigoitia is an award-winning scholar and professor at the School of Pedagogy in the Humanities at the Universidad Autónoma de Mexico and was chair of the Gender Studies Center at UNAM. She publishes amply in Spanish on gender in critical pedagogies, artistic and juridical practices focusing on women in prison. In English, she co-edited the book Critical Terms in Latin American Thought and co-coordinated the Spanish translation and publication of the two classics, Methodology of the Oppressed by Sheila Sandoval and Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands, La Frontera de Nu Mestiza. Now, each of the scholars are going to introduce the book, Forced by Circumstances, and we will begin with Norma Alarcón, the author.
Thank you very much, Paola, for that wonderful introduction. And I also thank my other colleagues as well for their great support in making sure that this book was ready to come out, and to Aunt Lute for having taken the risk of publishing my book. And I'm grateful to everyone with respect to that, and to Paola for agreeing to be our moderator, and who was such a support to me when I was still a professor at Berkeley before my retirement, and for agreeing to be part of our session today. I want to start out by reading a poem that is in the book, and which now I can't find. And also I've lost the poem. Here's the poem. I haven't memorized it, so I I have to have it in front of me. The name of the poem itself is Forced by Circumstance, from which I took as the title to the book. And here goes the poem. Forced by circumstance to be a woman, I have had to live far from your scent, far from your callous lips and smoke-stained hands. The day I left, I heard the miscrack of a wishbone. I longed to pull your flesh off every rib, putting off a kill I felt fated to fulfill. I held back, gestures, glances, even sounds. I've had to let you go to evoke my name, though your face follows me, reminding me of the unsaid. Enveloped by the silence of a mushroom cloud, I left with cardboard boxes, arm in arm, enjoying the endless lines of hapless immigrants who gather up their threadbare breath and walk. I've walked everywhere. I walked everywhere you walked, following your tracks on pressed down dirt. I've lived outside or inside your every move, your every thought. Forced by circumstance to be a woman, I live far from your scent, though your face follows me, reminding me of the unsaid. In a sense, we can take this book as part of the unsaid, both intimate, public, and professorial, intellectual. And I selected the first section title of the book, Hay que inventarnos. The reason being that my mentor, the Mexican author Rosario Castellanos, suggested that demand, if you will, in her own work, especially sobre cultura femenina, which is a great book to start with, actually, if you want to read Rosario Castellanos. I think it has been translated into English, so that's a way to introduce oneself to her work. In my preface, I remark, for example, that I look to books for answers to my questions, which were huge from my point of view of feminist thought, which I am convinced I began to have it from the age of 3 years old when I ran away from home the first time. The neighbors who recognized me walking away and across the plaza of town in Frontera, Coahuila, alerted my grandmother who lived down the street. The police gathered me up to take me back home. And I'm sure that my mother has never told me how she felt about it. So now it's too late. But I knew how I felt about it. I had to walk out. And I don't know, that kind of movement on my part seems to follow me, because when I'm fed up, I have to leave. And that's the only way I can put it. In any case, as I say in my preface, that in order to answer my questions, I had to read and collect as many points of view as I could along the way. And as I say there, books were my soulmates, my advocates, my friends, enemies, and adversaries, all of the above. My hunger for knowledge, as it were, led me to rely on books in order to answer my most difficult questions, mainly because my family was traditional and I was born untraditional. And that's why I told you my story about being around 3 years old and walking away from running away to grandmother's house. But the police station was in between. And because at the time I was such a güera, all of the town kind of recognized me because I was an anomaly to shall we say, to Mexican expectations of coloring. I was not dark. I was a güera. What can you say? Now the güera thing has followed me all my life, because people have said to me, "But you don't look Mexican." And I thought, tell me about it. I've been living with it since I was born, because my family's also felt the same way. Although my coloring can be seen to be this part of my mother's side of the family, while my indigeneity comes from the side of my father's. And I guess I haven't said yet, the land base that nurture me is Coahuiltecan, which encompasses the state of Coahuila, which borders with Texas. So Coahuiltecan also comes into Texas. So I can claim, as you will, all that landmass as part of my beginnings. And in Maine, the landmass in which I'm living, which is York, Maine, is the Wabanaki Nation. As far as the book title is concerned, I chose it not only from the poem that I wrote, not in honor of the book. I had written the poem a couple of decades before the book came out, but it lent itself to what how I felt. And now I'm living in York, Maine. I don't know how I ended up here, but well, I do know how I ended up here, but it's force of circumstance that landed me here. And actually, I have found it very pleasant, very beautiful. I like living next to the sea, so I can, if you will, now look at the Atlantic instead of the Pacific, vis-a-vis when I was in California for some time, for 20 years, I think, more or less. And as I said about the intro to the book, I called it Hay que inventarnos. And it's a phrase that I borrowed from Rosario Castellanos' work because she, as it were, was fed up with traditionalism. And in one of her essays, she said, in order to overcome traditionalism, hay que inventarnos. And I chose that as the first title for the first section of the book, so that as part of the idea that we have to inventarnos, invent ourselves. And part of that inventarnos is a way of, as it were, kicking off a new life, which is actually what I ended up doing when my parents immigrated to the United States, with a first stop in San Antonio, Texas, and the last stop, Chicago, Illinois. And the purpose as well calls attention to the fact that no living people at the time of my intellectual beginnings had any answers for me, for my questions. And in fact, I think that the book itself is a way of answering myself. And Hay que inventarnos, the first section of it, focuses totally on Chicana and Latina and women of color writers. And I selected most of the writers that I deal with in that section are, shall we say, my contemporaries, and that I work with, befriended, and who have done so much to put the work of Chicanas on the map. And that's why I selected that as a part of my mold, my attempt to, as it were, begin to answer my own questions. And of course, all the Chicana writers that I deal with on the first section are colleagues that in the end helped me very much, is to help along my own self-invention, which began in Chicago, Illinois, actually, because of the fact that my parents immigrated there, where I learned English, where which I enjoyed very much. And that fantastic, magnificent Lake Michigan was always a source of solace. I had gotten out of the desert and I was now near to a huge lake. And now I'm near a huge ocean, which suits me very well. I like bodies of water. Our livelihood comes from those bodies of water. Our survival. Pardon me?
I said that's wonderful. I wanted to let you know that we will be, in the next section, we're going to be looking at each of the books sections. So I hope that you will, get really very much into each section of the book after we hear from Dionne and Marisa.
Of course. Okay. As far as the first section is concerned, just a bit. The subsequent sections of the book deal with one of my thorns on the side, regardless of its helpful methodology, and that is the dialectic. The dialectic, which sort of hit me in the face, if you will, as a problematic, did not emerge for me until I was a professor at Berkeley. And I was in a department that had 4, if you include African American studies, 4 different major ethnic groups in the United States. And as such, I felt that the order that I gave to this was, on the one hand, the emphasis on Chicana feminisms, and on the second part, theoretical subjects. I can just say that one of my great influences in my life was not only to be a participant of the well-known women of color book, This Bridge Called My Back. And it was also very, very, in which I have an essay as well. I felt The Bridge Called My Back was inspirational to me because it opened up to me the world of women of color, Anglo-American based, and opened up for me the women of color world that I was not aware of before in my introduction to the United States on the one hand. And so the book itself and the invitation to collaborate was, which began in I think around the mid-70s, in terms of my collaboration, it opened up a vista for me in terms of the projects of the book that I would not have had without the book. So I want to acknowledge that because it was so influential, as well as Rosario Castellanos, which I mentioned in the beginning, because I was looking for a feminist. As a Latin Americanist, I was looking for a feminist that I could rely on, that I could look to, wherever she came from, as far in the Spanish-speaking hemisphere. And I was very lucky in my search to discover Rosario Castellanos. And she became quite a supporter because she was, in her context in Mexico City, she was a dynamic newspaper woman, author of novels, poems, and essays that are very powerful. And again, I recommend her to Chicanas as well, because she was a powerful feminist where they did hardly existed. The Mexicanas only got the vote for public life in 1954, I think, which I didn't discover until much later in my career. And so that not having the vote does not facilitate entering public life. And Rosario Castellanos, as a mentor, because she addressed all of these things from a feminist point of view, made me aware of my own background, if you will, as someone that was born in Mexico and that later on ended up in Chicago. And so I published a book on Rosario Castellanos, on her poetry exclusively, because she has a lot of work, and it was easy, as one has to delimit what one wants to do. And I wanted to follow her feminism through her poetry, where it is much more pronounced than in other works, but it's in every one of her work. I mean, when one is a feminist, that leaks through in what one writes and what one publishes, even if you don't say so. And so, it becomes imperative to ask, what is feminism? When does it get to other parts of the world? And other than, shall we say, the Anglo-American scenario. And she helped me to discover all of these things through her work. So I just want to acknowledge her important presence in my life for a long time. And moreover, I was very fortunate that she was a great novelist of the indigenous condition in Mexico, which was also very helpful to me in order to continue to understand more fully our imbrications are with the indigenous people in Mexico and in the United States as well. So I'm glad that she was an early influence. And as far as I said earlier, that the second section of the book was very influenced by being faced with dialectical theory and dialectical practice, which I never found sufficient. And for my purposes, for my desire in terms of Chicana and other women of color work. And so I want to find, if you will, other ways of expressing what feminists actually do that gets them out of the shall we say, the sinkhole of men against women, or in every ethnic group, or men or women questioning the patriarchy on every ethnic group, as well as Anglo-America, because actually we have to question the patriarchy worldwide. And I decided, of course, since I was a Latin Americanist and Rosario Castellanos, I couldn't. Let me tell you, I looked throughout Latin America looking for what you might call a strong feminist back in 1970 or something like that, when I was writing my dissertation. And I could not find what I thought in 1970, I could not find a strong feminist in the Latin American Spanish-speaking world other than Rosario Castellanos. So she has a singular place in the history of feminism in Latin America, or in the Spanish-speaking world. And I am not sure about Spain. It's a Spanish-speaking country. I'm not sure there. But Rosario Castellanos, for me, was a very thoroughgoing feminist that took the risk, because she was made fun of. She was mocked for her points of view. She was mocked for her interventions of this nature. She only had one, shall we say, male that was, shall we say, strong enough to advance her work in Mexico and wherever he went, and that was Jose Emilio Pacheco. That is a poet from Mexico. So she was, shall we say, the first male that advocated for her work after her death, unfortunately. So she didn't get to hear that. She didn't get to read that, but he was the first Mexican male to acknowledge her strength. And of course, many women have since then. So Marisa can tell you from her own gender studies position in the University of de UNAM, Universidad Nacional de México, UNAM. And as far as, and as I said, the dialectic takes takes a front center stage without even mentioning it in the second part of the book. And that I structure, in retrospect, in an intuitive and impulsive move. And in retrospect, I see that the second part of my book, I structure the Chicana subjectivity and subject as the figure. Of course, I'm that double, if you will. I'm her double, but as the figure that would critique binaries, which conceptual binaries that I think structured the production of knowledge for a long, long time. But it was not sufficient for me because I had what you might call a third woman. And intuitively, I called the journal that I founded Third Woman, because this was the excluded woman from dialogues that were binary in a dialectical fashion. Feminism against patriarchy, white feminism against patriarchy, women of color against vis-a-vis challenging patriarchy, and so on and so forth. And I wanted more. I wanted more than that. So I elaborated, if you will, an imaginary Chicana subject with me as her double that would question the dialectic through the major concepts that structured our lives for a long time. Mm-hmm. And to position my critic and myself, her shadow, in such a way that the binarisms of conceptual thinking could be, on the one hand, acknowledged, and on the other hand, questioned as deeply as I could. And for that section, I also selected concepts and so on that were swirling around me, especially in Berkeley, in which I was faced with a dialectic that was shutting me down. I don't mean that people intended to shut me down personally. I did not take it personally. I just took it as a form of the production of knowledge that people were used to. And I didn't want to really spend years writing a book challenging, if you will, dialectical thinking as a methodology for women of color in particular. And so this was my way of questioning binarisms and dialectics. So this is why, for many people, I think they are Marxists. Their research is not good enough if it is not capable of introducing women of color in some fashion or another. And so they become kind of like reference books vis-a-vis Marx sometimes, and other theoreticians. So that was my mode of questioning dialectics. And I didn't spend time writing a book about that because I didn't want to get derailed from my major project, and that is to bring Chicanas and women of color into the forefront of my research, and in which I then sort of relegated dialectics to the footnotes, if you will, my footnotes, my personal footnotes. And the order in which I did the first section really had to do with putting in the forefront Chicana feminist literature, and also questioning the role of the mother in our bringing and nurturing, and the role of the mother in that respect? Does she go along with the patriarch, or is she actually supporting and helping you out the door with another sense of yourself kind of thing? And as far as making familia from scratch, for example, it was my thinking and my thought that if we were going to invent us, then we had to also start familia from scratch. And that particular title was drawn from Cherie Moraga's work in Loving in the Warriors, because it struck me as she was right on, making from a feminist, and in her case also a lesbian, had to make familia from scratch. But a feminist also has to make familia from scratch, because one is not born, it's certainly not I, born into a feminist family at all. On the contrary, I was born into a family that knows your future and subordinates you to it. We were earmarked to get married. And of course, that doesn't require much, in our parents' mind, that doesn't require very much other than to make you an appropriate feminine figure for your forthcoming marriage to whomever it may be. I think I have always considered very basic to myself, periodly, really, and that is translator trader. That particular essay, a paradigmatic figure of Chicana feminism. Some have questioned whether I should make that, I had made that a key aspect of my work, to do it in that fashion that I did. But I feel that the translator suffers a great deal for doing so, because I see translation not only from one language to another, but also from one concept to another. In other words, we transcode as many things as we can, if we can, to the discourse that one thinks is leading one's path forward. And so I felt that imperative back in the 70s to write something about the kinds of malignment sometimes and so on when you translate, whether it be within your own language or whether it's from a foreign language. And one is seen as a traitor, and that links me up with Malincin's fame of traitorous behavior, because she translated for Cortés, the conqueror. However, I forgive her for that misstep, given that she was sold by her parents. So think about it. If you were sold by your parents, how will you find your way in the world? You were thrown out, as it were. How do you make your way in the world? So I thought she was a magnificent figure for me to, as it were, come to understand what speech production can also bring upon one. Because translation means just that, transcoding, revising language, inventing language, borrowing language, and so on and so forth. In my case, I am very oriented towards language because, first of all, because I started learning other languages after coming to the United States, and that in particular was also very helpful for me to just sort of go around the globe and say, okay, what are you saying that can help me? help. So I was a huge reader of whatever came my way. In fact, Nietzsche himself saved me from the church when I was 15 years old. For example, I was not satisfied with my education in a Catholic high school, and the nuns and the priests were not happy with me because I was not a devout person and questioned them on everything. And so so that I had to, as it were, leave the church with the help of Nietzsche. I needed a supporter, see, and I couldn't deal with this with my parents because being so traditionalist, they were kind of stuck with their mode of thinking, which was the right way of thinking, right? So Nietzsche called out priests and churches and religions beautifully. And I thought, that's the guy for me. I don't care, what his nationality is. I didn't even know his place in the philosophical world. All I know is that I picked him up in the library, I read it, and I saw that he was my supporter, big time. And I said, okay, I'm going to keep you forever. And I did do that because I refer to him in parts of my work at times. But I have never, as it were, elucidated or elaborated on that point, point vis-a-vis religion. He deplored the piety of religious people, and I thought, oh, fantastic. And I was already familiar with that piety because I was in a Catholic school in Chicago, and the nuns were tormenting presence in my life, but they were also very helpful. They taught me to learn English in 1 year. They made extra time for me to teach me language. And this is the beauty of nuns. I'm so sorry that they are oppressed by the priesthood. Although in later years, with the feminist movement, nuns broke out. But they are still, as it were, subordinated to the Pope, the bishop, the cardinal, and so on and so forth. But I got out of that hornet's nest as quickly as I could. So this translator trader had to write about someone that had been besmirched throughout the centuries as a traitor. And I sort of felt, well, if doing this form of translation, whether it's one language to another, or whether it's transcoding fancy discourses, or so on and so forth, that I had to bring this into play. And the dialectic that was so practiced in the United States, shall we say, closed doors for me. I don't see the world dialectically. I see the world as it's multinational, it's multi-feminist, it's multi-everything, which is something, of course, that you realize the current regime that rules us in the United States don't like that stuff. They want a monologic, a white supremacist acceptance of white supremacy, and of course, women, forget it. I don't think that they will be treated very well if this regime continues. I think we will lose everything as women, or they will try to erase it. Consequently, we have to do as much as we can. That is not sure from a feminist point of view, because we do not want to lose to these kinds of attitudes what we have achieved in order to our own self-determination in our own discourses, because the patriarchy is not going to be very friendly forever, let me put it this way: it is so strong, and men in our times even feel kind of lost, and feel actually that not only women but people of color are taking what belongs to them. That's the white patriarchy we are living with today. And I think, again, we have to recognize it as a patriarchy, because the women that follow them are just, shall we say, helpers of the particular kind of authoritarianism or fascism that they are elaborating for us in the United States. Now, people prefer, so many people prefer authoritarianism. I prefer fascism, because it brings into play how fascism can operate in diverse cultures. Also, it's easy to say. We can say it right off, and it has a lot of meaning and a lot of weight in ways that authoritarianism doesn't do. On the other hand, for me, authoritarianism is too long. And I rather defend the concept of fascism to apply to our circumstance than, and more particularly because they are thoroughly against people of color and feminism and women of color and so on and so forth. And this will be very damaging to our achievements. I don't know if I should quit now, Paola, or should I say more?
I think we can ask Dionne and Marisa to just say a few words, and then for you to come back in on it, if that's okay.
Okay.
Dionne, do you want to?
Yeah, so I'm up. Um, Norma, I just want to say preach. That's what in my mind the whole time. Um, you just gave us such a gift in sharing about your intellectual trajectory, connecting to current. I just, it does take me back to my being a baby Chicana scholar. Sorry, I tend to get emotional a lot these days. So thank you. I think you also remind us of the power of your voice, your thought. Gosh, so much. I think the idea of books as allies, like that just resonates so deep. I'm sure for many of us, how reading was like a form of solace. It gave us language. And so I just want to say thank you. So let me start. It's very short, folks. So I want to acknowledge that I live in a large region in Southern California that's part of Tovangar, the land of the Tongva people or San Gabriel Valley. In these challenging times, it's so important to remember the land, our connection with our ancestors and relatives, past and present. I want to thank Norma Alarcón for the invitation to write the introduction to Force by Circumstance. It's a tremendous honor. Thank you for your trust in me to tell the story, at least one story, about your work and your legacy contributions. I also want to thank co-editoras Norma Cantú and Marisa. I can't remember exactly when I met Norma Cantú, as it was either through the Chicana higher ed pipeline of MOOCs and or through Norma Alarcón, but both she and Norma were among my first femtors and guides on my higher educational path. They were and continue to be the original chingonas that showed me it was possible for Chicanas to be intellectuals, educators, and writers in the academy. So my introduction is titled Making Chicana Critical Theory from Scratch, Norma Alarcón's Malintzin Praxis and Feminist Studies, and I think she spoke to a lot of that in her remarks. Of course, that's a play on Norma's essay about the work of Elena Viramontes and Sherry Moraga, and of course, this is a line from Moraga's work. It's a huge undertaking to encompass Norma's body of work. Writing this introduction gave me the opportunity to tap into a past self, the me who was a young Chicana scholar in training, reading Norma's essays and finding in them the language to translate my own experience. In the present, I mean, it's largely due to seeing a Chicana professor, that was Norma, that I felt like, oh wow, I could do this. And that speaks to why it's so important for all of us, Chicana profes, that we are out there, that we are in the academy, continue to keep it going and do the work. So in the present, I'm a senior professor at a teaching institution, and I've weathered several academic storms due to my commitment to Chicana feminism, but I'm not backing down, and Norma's work reminds me of we can't back down. This was the lens that I brought to her work, and it's through the lens that I reconnected with the significance of Norma's work. So I was reading it as a student, and then rereading them again, and I've reread them and taught them over the years so many times that it was just a powerful experience for me. So in my introduction, I followed the path of her essays as they appeared roughly chronologically and I contextualize them against the historical context in which they were written. So mostly going from 1981 with the publication of Chicana's feminist literature to ending with her work, some writing she did on Gloria Anzaldúa, decoding Gloria Anzaldúa. Throughout the introduction, I use section headers as participle forms of verbs. So I'm following Norma's practice or praxis. So each section starts with like translating, making sense, resisting, repossessing ourselves, and liberating. It does kind of create a trajectory of progress. And as we know, progress can unfortunately be taken back. But I think of it as something that like we have a path, we may be taken back, but we always know we can keep working forward. So the path eye chart goes from Alarcón's first voicing of Malincine by quote unquote putting the flesh back on the object. And this is a thread throughout her work, right? I also look at her work on women of color subjectivity, which can be put in dialogue with Kimberly Crenshaw's coining of the term intersectionality, right? So Kimberly Crenshaw coined that in a legal context. Norma is theorizing that through flesh and blood experiences. Another quote from, I think this one is from this bridge called My Back, and to talk about the experience and agency of intersectionality, which is very fraught. This is, I think, very clear in Norma's work. Her work of the early to mid 90s also explored Chicana intellectual labor and conditions of existence. You know, in I think cognitive desires, it was sort of very heavily coded, but kind of we could know like, oh, this is about Norma's experience, right? But it's also all of our experience. It's still, I mean, I read that 30 years later and I'm like, oh my gosh, was what I went through too. She meditates on Chicana intellectual labor, and then she comes back to that in a later essay, Conjugations, where she shares about her career at Berkeley. In the mid 90s, she took on major debates about feminism, race, and ethnicity. The question of difference in the academy and US society, back when people were using the term multiculturalism. Norma has a pretty strong critique of that in her essay, Conjugating Subjects. In the early 2000s, I suggest the keynote was liberation. I mean, liberation throughout, but it came out even stronger. And so by this, I mean liberation from Western and European theories that she started out with, liberation through the work of Gloria Anzaldúa. She begins to use the term self-decolonization, and liberation from academic disciplinary processes. And I love that you comment on that, Norma. She spoke early of repossessing ourselves as Chicanas, and I would argue that when she stepped back from the academy, she repossessed herself to stand outside of that space of subordination. And maybe my very last comment here, because I want to make sure we move on, but I wrote at my last sentence is Alarcón's Malincine praxis empowered her to make Chicana feminist theory from scratch, constructing a legacy of critical and theoretical praxis that charted a path toward our future. We cannot allow ourselves to be pushed back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dionne. It's so powerful. It's hard to even have even open my mouth to speak. So, but now can we hear from Marisa?
Thank you very much. I'm very, very honored to be with you here, Norma, and to present and make this book. In your triggering words as trying to address the unsaid. And for me, this trying to address the unsaid, and as you said, to grasp the structures of these like non-equivalent residues of Chicana. You work on Chicana on their desires, on their oppression, but there's always a residue that is theoretically challenging to digest. But what you do for me, as I wrote it in the epilogue, which I'm going to read because if not, I tend to take more time. What you do what we do in this epilogue is try to to end with your pedagogical maneuvers, with your translation, with your working maneuvers on the Chicana word, which it couldn't be understood. And you had to do a lot of different movidas, like cognitive desires, translating it to maquiladoras, no, seasoned workers, and then translate till you get to Chicana critic, till you get to Chicana cronista, till you get to Chicana writer. And all this journey, it's a journey that is, of course, the book, but one specific way of this journey is your pedagogical intervention. So I'm going to read. The epilogue is called Critical Thinking as a Pedagogical Movida, Double binds, accents, and contradiction for students, thinking of students as speaking subjects. And I marked this title and the epilogue with Ursula K. Le Guin, and of course it could be also Octavia Butler, and I put Octavia Butler there. True Voyage is Return. And if we reflect on what you did when you spoke before, Norma, was going back to Rosario Castellanos and going back to Frontera and going back, and as going back, you could be propelled to El Porvenir, no? To going forward. We end Forced by Circumstance with an epilogue, a final text that closes the book with an episode on pedagogy. We wanted to reflect on this kind of maneuvers, which turns the classroom, students, and the university into radical and critical subjects. We found it mandatory to return to the classrooms, its students, and in the university in the face of what is happening today with the encroachment, intrusion, punishment, paranoid and violent persecution of professors, syllabi, and students in many universities in the US and also around the world. Mm-hmm. Norma's book represents a strong analysis, but also a map of movidas and accents, movidas, the hands, and accents, the tongue, which mobilize discourse and action inside paralyzed classroom and fearful academic spaces. An epilogue can be understood as a journey of return, a way of reading and making sense backwards. We design an epilogue so we can read Norma Alarcón's work in reverse, beginning with her pedagogical practice. Octavia Butler's epilogue, to give an example, represents her way to paradoxically introduce at the end of the story her personal and historical accents, the inflections and emphasis of the story told, fears, anecdotes, passions, and hidden meanings. There, in the afterword, she unveils invisible triggers and unexpected streams. Following this reverse logic, this movement of return, let us remember Ansel Dia ends Borderlands, the narrative section, with a part called El Regreso, the return. This epilogue discloses some of the accents, inflections, and highlights which make Norma Alarcón a critical pedagogue and thus an extraordinary rebellious thinker in consciousness raising, aiming to shape and educate students and other atravesados, and we'll get to this word, atravesados. Norma, I want you to reflect, if you want, and atravesados as the Chicana discourse which interrupt. Atravesado is atravesarte, get in the way. How Chicanas get in the way of doing theory, how Chicanas get in the way of formation, how this getting in the way, atravesarse is also, of course, a border vocabulary, is also very important in addressing this subject in process, which never ending, right? It's always a residue to address these atravesados as in process. I think this is one of your major acknowledgments or your major regalos to theory, no? That identity is always in process, and it's also in process as in the juridical realm, because we have all these atravesados in prison, not only waiting in front of the door as in Kafka, but being in prison in very horrible and dark circumstances. So speaking subjects and subjects in process, which former atravesados were crossing, interrupting, the hegemonic theories. And this concept relates to the capacity of, I love the word, it sounds in Spanish, tomar la palabra. Tomar la palabra, it has to do with tomar, grasp grammar, grip accents, and cling to words, to shape needed language and tones to stand up ground. That's what this book does. The book does in the third chapter, shape needed languages, sharp grammar, grip accents to stand up ground, to make fascism visible and its strategies understandable, so Chicanas can hold the word and be understood. Ansaldúa talks about los atravesados. Are the squint-eyed, los viscos, que no ven así, the cross-eyed, the perverse, the queer, the troublesome, the mongrel, the mulatto, the half-breed, in short, those who cross through, pass over, and also get crossed through. They are the non-normal, the aliens, and the transgressors. So how these atravesados se atraviesan and interrupt theory and institutions and academia. These pedagogical maneuvers, las maniobras de interrupción, of interruption, in Norma Alarcón critical performance, represent a mastery on accentuation, a grammar and a practice that exemplify a work on tongue and body to transform atravesados into speaking subjects, in process, in the root of enunciation and articulation of a speech that can be a chronicle, can be a writer, and of course, the end of this, Norma, is a critique. From atravesados to be críticas, no? But the beautiful thing is the críticas se atraviesan, the críticas interrupt. So we don't lose the character of atravesadas. This concept, and I want you, if you like, that you could say some words about the function of theory as these atravesadas, as to interrupt, and the function of theory also as getting, probably not like other Lord Norma, but like you did, that getting inside the master house and look at things inside the master house, take things and be sure that you can exit this house. Not only that the master house cannot be, analyzed by its own tools, but you get into Lacan, you get into Foucault, and you spy inside, and you learn the structure and the architecture, and then you go out. The notion of process, as in subject of process, I have una media página más to go. The notion of process refers, as your subject in process, as this interruption function, refers to endless ways of reconfiguring identity, as we can appreciate in all the essays in this book. It also situates a juridical sense, which interests me the most. So many of these atravesados face the law in prison, are detained in detention centers, as stated by Kafka and Derrida before the law, holding human and civil rights impossible struggles with closed doors and in tunnels. Not with this door that is supposed to be the door of the peasant. No. There's no supposed door. There's no doors. There are tunnels. Los atravesados are situated in Alarcón's pedagogy precisely in between two machines. And I refer machines as the lesson guattari, which are open mechanisms that connect and constellate and offer detail, content, and contour inside homogenizing systems. And Norma is talking all the time in this 3 section about the tongue and the hand, grammar and action. Norma's pedagogy resonates with Ansaldúa's unstoppable tongue, which keeps on pushing, and with Sandoval, Chela, creative and critical maniobras, which keep dismantling inequality inside system of power. This pedagogy on action and accent represents a way of teaching and occupying the classroom. Norma Alarcón understands that students are capable of constructing futures of self-determination. This theoretical move create theoretical move that would pivot these sujetos sobrantes, Norma, los subjects in excess, disposable, que son no entendidos and erased, to subjects which are in process of naming themselves and contending identity and law also. And there are many prisoners and many detention centers full of los atravesados. Norma Alarcón wrote parallel to Spivak Also, if you could address this in the next 5 minutes, Norma, that are left, you would parallel to that essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? To analyze and define the process of becoming a subject of speech, tied to reading, writing, assessing and moving away from silence into transforming atravesados and chicanas into chronicles, cronistas, writers, creators, and critics of their own self-made stories. To finish, this book with a pedagogical turn means, first and foremost, focusing on the students and Norma Alarcón's critical pedagogies in a historical moment when sticking one's tongue out by teaching race, class, sexuality, or gender is persecuted and punished. The right-wing extremists in the USA want to make critical thinking invisible, if not totally disappeared, for the sake of white supremacist ideologies. And let's remember, I'm finishing here, let's remember that Norma offers, se dice offer, that dedicates this book to her students, that make her think, and also she thought through them and with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marisa. I also want to add, for people who don't know, that Marisa was actually Norma's student, and that these and these thoughts are very much embodied and situated. And we've come now to where it's about 25 or 20 after 11, and we're supposed to end at 11:30, but we're going to go on for 10 minutes more than that. And we'll just have about 10 minutes of everyone kind of wrapping up and giving the speakers, Norma, beginning with Norma, your final kinds of thoughts. And then we'd like to have maybe about 10 minutes, if we have the time, hopefully, for the audience to ask Norma some questions. So Norma, perhaps you could address some of the questions that Marisa posed, or say any final thoughts that you wish.
Well, are there final thoughts?
In process, Norma, always in process.
In process, yes.
No, unless we get demented by age, and I'm grateful that I'm not yet demented, I think.
Sure.
But that as long as that is the case, we can continue on, and I wanted to comment on some of the things that Dionne and Marisa have said. One, Marisa, or was it Dionne? I think. Anyway, my style, I have named it a crochet style. It's the only thing I was able to do in my youth with the needle, crochet. I never went into knitting. I decided it was too much for me. But anyway, I think that this going back and forth is a crochet movement. And this is why this word sort of descended upon me. You know how words hit you when you are looking for discursive avenues that are different from what society might offer you. And sometimes, if you are as old as I am, society only had to offer me traditionalism, which was, of course, not acceptable. So that's how I have seen my style, in a very, shall we say, mundane way, everyday way, home style way, crochet. And back and forth, as Marisa said, the back and forth that I do. And yes, I did dedicate my book to my students because when I arrived in Berkeley in 1980 something, I discovered the multiplicity of students of different backgrounds that I had not had before in the Midwest, where I taught for a while. And they were full of information. They were full of questions. They were full of comments, including the undergraduate classroom. And I felt compelled to entertain their questions as much as I could. And so my classroom was always open to commentary, critique, and questions, of course. So you can say that the book itself was produced as a result of this, my pedagogical approaches within the undergraduate and graduate domains. And they were very exhilarating students. Of course, as anyone knows, Paola, I'm sure, Dionne too, who went to Berkeley, and Marisa, they all went to, they're all in Berkeley. Oh my gosh. This is a gathering of people that passed through Berkeley, and those who are still there, which would be Paola. I wanted to the atravesados. I want to take the question of the atravesados. I think for the contemporary white supremacist regime occupying the White House, we are all atravesados, right? For them, we are atravesados. And obviously, as you can see, they want to expel the atravesados, and they don't care what immigrant they pick up on the streets. They are atravesados. And the worst part is that they are, because they are sort of KKK influenced, the atravesados they first pick up are people of color. Because that is the lens that power continues to operate with. People of color, atravesados, and out you go, or marginalized you get, and that is the agenda that we. And I think the word atravesados, which I think Gloria Anzaldúa coined, as it were, by alluding to us as atravesados, absolutely, in the eyes of power. In the eyes of power, we are atravesados. And everybody that complains about us, etc., since I can remember. And I find it, feminism from any aspect, from any quarter, will be seen by patriarchy as atravesados. A las atravesadas, aquí vienen las atravesadas. And so we are a pain in the neck to patriarchy. Absolutely, we are. But they have to take into account that they are more than a pain in the neck. That they are silencing approaches that they have, because they don't want to hear from women. It just confabulates the patriarchal structure that they have spent 2,000 years or more elaborating. And these parvenus, meaning all of us, are trying to, as it were, disarrange the structure that they thought was suitable. And feminists of all colors are saying, no, your structure is not suitable. And we have things to say about it. And in part, this is Dale's part of the book I did. We interrupt. Los atravesados interrupt our happy lives. We think happy lives. And, here comes another one, making noise kind of attitude. And, but the patriarchy has to get used to it. You will continue to have noise for as long as some of us live anyway. So get used to it, as some might say, get used to it. Let me see what else. Tomar la palabra. That's an excellent phrase, because Chicana feminists tomaron la palabra. And in a world that was, in the beginnings, were hostile to women to tomar la palabra. And, but many brave Chicanas tomaron la palabra. And they also have been a great deal of inspiration for me on this side of the Mexican border, que tomaron la palabra and passed it on to me. That I learned from that rebellion of the 70s forward. And I'm thankful for that. And the function of theory. Well, let me first thematically speaking, let me continue with the idea of subjects in process, that I personally feel that all of us are subjects in process, because the discourse that we need to generate and what we will be generated in the face of fascism, racism, sexism, whatever ism you prefer, in order to do that, we have to not only, we become not only subjects in excess, because we won't shut up, if you will, and we won't shut up our critique as well as our voices, and we can't afford it. Spiritually speaking, for starters, we cannot afford it. Neither can our body afford that. So we move on, and yes, we interrupt. Yeah, it's awful. You know, we have to be polite and not interrupt. But part of feminism worldwide is a huge interruption. It's a huge interruption that we have to keep accepting on the one hand and moving forward on the other. And we have been seen as subjects in excess for that reason, because it disturbs what you will patriarchal traditionalism. It is very disturbing to have this, and they have to change their own discourse, which of course they haven't done. Privilege doesn't think they have to reinvent their discourse necessarily, and it's up to us to continue to push for changing that discourse, so that one day we can see women inclusive of everything. And although I'm pessimistic about the idea that we will ever have a universal philosophy, as the European and Anglo-American patriarchal terrain have assumed in their own production of philosophy, knowledge, and etc. From this point of view, I think that much of their work is easy, because they only had to think about their own body and their own subjectivity. They didn't think, they were preaching to us, and feminism said, stop that. It's not getting, your preaching is not going to get me anywhere. And I will not be able to, as it were, tomar la palabra and be a speaking subject of whatever persuasion I want. And perhaps I should pause there and, the function of theory. The function of theory, well, I saw theory extremely helpful, philosophically speaking and conceptually speaking. But I also noted that I had to interrupt theory because it was not inclusive of women of color at all. So I was bound and determined to interrupt theory and extant theory, if you will. On the other hand, our own production of theoretical perspectives has been very, I think, very important to all of us, and also the importance of inventing concepts. Inventing concepts. This is what feminists have done, both of color and not, that to introduce new concepts that guide our discourse. In other words, concepts guide our discourse because they bring together, with one word, dense meaning. And this is why concepts need to be, shall we say, investigated and unpacked. On the other hand, we need them, so we can't give them up, because they are very helpful to us to, for example, just take the concept of Chicano and Chicana, okay? It was a new invention, a new terminology, a sort of rescatada from the past, when it was racism myself, because of a dense indigenous provenance that we are all come from in Mexico and in the United States if we live over here. And we have, so consequently, you know, concepts like Aztlán, that was invented. It wasn't invented in the sense that it didn't pre-exist, but its elaboration, its charge, its push upon us to rethink was incredibly fantastic. And so, and this is the kind of service that concepts can give us. Consequently, we have to unpack concepts that we do not like, concepts that we think are oppressive and not helpful to advance our discourse. And even the terms, as I said, Chicano and Chicana, are not necessarily invented, but retrieved from discourses from the end of last century, in which this Chicana was a slur to demean people of Mexican descent. And that's important to remember. And this is why the introduction of this concept for a new grouping of people of Mexican descent and getting us out of the dialectic of Mexican American, which some of us embrace and others of us have kind of. This is why I have this particular cover for my book. And by the way, I want to thank Liliana Wilson for allowing me to use this particular painting of hers. And yeah, right. And what I want to say is that the walking on a tightrope also was very meaningful to me, because when one is trying to get away from the past names that are offered to us to take on, I did not like Mexican American. So I was very, very open to Chicano. Also, the fact that this was not only race and class based in terms of its retrieval, it also, as it were, highlighted the fact that the Chicano movement came from the Los Campos, from the campesinos and the workers. And that to me also was extremely important, because, if you will, the voice, a very important voice, was emerging from the previous kind of bourgeois Mexican American scholarship that was a little bit tame for us in the later 20th century. And we radicalized that. And it's another important aspect of concepts. If you want, you can radicalize, or if you will, return to the past and work with that, or redefine past concepts to suit us in the present, and rescue those concepts that are helpful but need expansion, but they're still very useful for the creation of new discourses by groups or people in general, and feminists, of course, absolutely. I think that I should stop there. The function of theory, let me say just a couple of words, is to bring together as much as possible all the concepts that will assist your voice in order to theorize through a conceptual framework that encompasses wider possibilities. And the notion of the speaking subject, for example, was very important to me as well, because it was claiming the idea that I had a subjectivity and an individuality that was not part of my traditional upbringing or even knowledge, but that introduced both the idea of self-invention, self-determination, self-reconsideration, self-writing, self-everything. And if this seems too, shall we say, selfish, that so much about the self, is that we didn't have one. that without the feminist movements of the 20th century and of our times, still slams out with the idea that we are subjects in excess. And this is where racism and sexism comes in. Those of us who acknowledge our traditional, our background in the concept of race, for example, have to, as it were, move forward and redefine the ways in which we may have been defined. Maybe I should stop there because I would like to have some questions from our audience, or everybody would like to, I think.
At this time, I'm not seeing any questions from the audience. If you have any, can you please just say them? But actually, we're also out of time. Unfortunately, we're 10 minutes over. And so since I'm not seeing any, but I am seeing people say that their deepest gratitude to you, Norma. And I want to echo that because I think all of us are absolutely incredibly indebted to you, that you have given so much and you paved a way for so many of us. And in my little life at Berkeley, without you, I would never have been able to survive. And everything that you did, everything that you brought has been incredibly important to everything that I do there. I miss you there a lot, and you've not been around for quite a while, but I often think, what would Norma do, Thank you so much for everything. I want to thank all of the speakers, Marisa and Dionne. Thank you so much for your insights and for the brilliance that took place today. Thanks to both of you as well. I think we have to, and I want to also thank Antlut Press, including Georgina Guardado. Thank you to Joe McKesson for audio-visual work and for helping us to, get it a little bit together over here. Thank you so much to everybody in the audience for being here and also for your beautiful comments. I've been reading them in between little by little. And we do have to end now because we're quite.
Paola, we missed one name. She helped us a lot in the last phase.
Don't pick those.
Shay.
No,
Shay?
¿cómo?
Shay
Shay.
Braun? I put Shay in the chat. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Shay Braun, thank you.
Sí, thank you.
Maine helped with the book. Is that it? Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you on behalf of the editors
Norma.
for that.
Thank you,
And
Norma.
I hope everyone will go to the Antlut website and buy the
Bye.
book. And also this will be on YouTube. This conversation will be on YouTube. And we thank everybody who's here, and especially our very beloved Norma Alarcón. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chicana power.
Okay.